Have you ever noticed that when we're children, people ask us a very simple question? What do you want to be when you grow up? And somehow, when we're 8 or 9 years old, we always have an answer. Maybe we want to be a doctor, maybe an athlete, maybe an astronaut, maybe a musician. At that age, we don't spend much time worrying about whether it's realistic or not. We simply dream. But something changes as we get older. The question becomes harder. And for many people, the answer becomes less clear. So let me ask you something. If someone asked you today, "What's your dream?" would you have an answer?
That's actually a really interesting question, because I think a lot of people would assume the answer should be easy. After all, we're adults. We should know what we want from life. But honestly, I think many people struggle with that question. Not because they don't have dreams, but because life becomes busy. We focus on work, responsibilities, bills, daily routines, and before we know it, we stop asking ourselves what we truly want. Instead of chasing dreams, we're just trying to get through the week.
I think that's very true. And what's interesting is that dreams don't always disappear. Sometimes they simply get buried underneath everyday life. A person may still want to travel the world. They may still want to start a business. They may still want to learn a new language. But those dreams slowly move to the background while other things take priority. Then one day, something reminds them. A conversation, a book, a video, a trip, and suddenly that old dream comes back.
I've experienced that myself. There was a time when I thought dreams were only for young people. I thought that once you reached a certain age, life became more practical. But over time, I realized something important. Dreams don't have an expiration date. You don't wake up one morning and become too old to dream. In fact, I've met people in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s who were starting completely new chapters in their lives. Some were learning English, some were traveling for the first time, some were building businesses, some were pursuing passions they had ignored for decades, and honestly, I found that incredibly inspiring.
I love that idea because I think many people put unnecessary limits on themselves. They say things like, "I'm too old. It's too late. I should have started years ago." But imagine if every person believed that. How many great stories would never happen? How many achievements would never exist? How many dreams would remain unfinished? Sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't lack of ability. It's the belief that we missed our chance.
Exactly. And I think another problem is comparison. People spend so much time comparing their lives to other people. They look online and see someone who seems more successful, more confident, more accomplished, and they start feeling behind. But life isn't a race. Everyone moves at a different speed. Everyone has a different starting point, and everyone defines success differently. That's why I think dreams should be personal, not something we copy from other people.
That's such an important point, because if we're chasing somebody else's dream, we'll never truly feel satisfied. The dream has to belong to us. Maybe your dream is to travel. Maybe it's to speak English confidently. Maybe it's to have more freedom. Maybe it's simply to live a peaceful and meaningful life. Whatever it is, it doesn't need to impress anyone else. It only needs to matter to you.
And that's what today's conversation is really about. Not just learning English, not just practicing vocabulary. It's about taking a moment to think about your own future, to reconnect with the things that excite you, the things that motivate you, the things that make you curious. Because sometimes all it takes is one honest conversation to remind us what we're working toward.
So, before we continue, let's ask our listeners a simple question. If there were no limits, no fear, and no possibility of failure, what would you do? Take a moment and think about it, because your answer might reveal a dream you've forgotten. And in the next part, we're going to talk about the dreams we had as children, how they shaped us, and why some of them still influence our lives today.
You know, When we were talking about dreams earlier, it reminded me of something funny. When I was a child, I was absolutely convinced I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. There was no doubt in my mind, no uncertainty, no confusion. I had a plan, and I believed everything would happen exactly the way I imagined. Looking back now, it's kind of funny because life rarely follows the plans we make as children. But at the same time, I think there was something beautiful about that confidence. Children don't spend much time worrying about failure. They don't analyze every risk. They don't constantly ask themselves, what if it doesn't work? They simply imagine a future they love and believe it's possible.
I completely agree. In fact, one of the things I miss most about childhood is that sense of possibility. When you're young, the world feels enormous. Every year brings something new. Every experience feels exciting. And because you don't fully understand limitations yet, your imagination becomes incredibly powerful. I remember wanting to do so many different things. At one point, I wanted to be a pilot. Then I wanted to be an athlete. Later, I wanted to be a writer. And what's interesting is that none of those dreams felt impossible. I never stopped to think about how difficult they might be. I was focused entirely on the excitement of the idea.
That's such a great observation. Children are often driven by curiosity rather than fear. As adults, we tend to do the opposite. We focus on obstacles. We think about what could go wrong. We calculate risks. And while some of that is necessary, I sometimes wonder if we lose something important along the way. Because many childhood dreams weren't really about the job itself, they were about a feeling. A child who wants to be an astronaut might simply love adventure. A child who wants to be a teacher might enjoy helping others. A child who wants to be a musician might love creativity and self-expression. The dream was never just a career. It was a reflection of who they were.
That's actually a fascinating way to think about it. Maybe the specific dream changes, but the reason behind it often stays the same. For example, I never became a pilot, but I still love traveling. I still enjoy discovering new places. I still feel excited whenever I step onto an airplane. So even though the dream changed, a part of it stayed with me. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Sometimes we look at our childhood dreams and assume we failed because we didn't achieve them. But maybe that's not the right way to see it. Maybe those dreams simply evolved into something different.
Exactly. And I think that's an important lesson. Many people feel disappointed when they compare their current life to the dreams they had years ago. But life isn't a straight line. We grow, we learn, we change. The experiences we have shape us in ways we never expected. Sometimes we discover new interests. Sometimes we discover new strengths. And sometimes we realize that the thing we wanted at 10 years old isn't the thing we want at 30. That doesn't mean we've failed, it means we've grown.
I think one of the most interesting questions people can ask themselves is this: what did I love doing as a child? Not because you need to recreate your childhood, but because the answer often reveals something important about who you are. Maybe you loved drawing. Maybe you loved building things. Maybe you loved reading stories. Maybe you loved exploring nature. Whatever it was, there's usually a clue hidden there. A clue about your interests, your personality, and the things that naturally bring you joy.
That's true. And sometimes we become so busy with adult responsibilities that we forget those things. We stop making time for activities that once made us happy. We tell ourselves we'll do them later. When work becomes less stressful, when life becomes easier, when we have more free time. But somehow that perfect moment never arrives, which is why I think it's important to reconnect with those parts of ourselves every once in a while. Not because we're trying to become children again, but because we're trying to remember what genuinely excites us.
I love that. And maybe that's a good question for everyone listening today. Think back to when you were 10 years old. What excited you? What made you curious? What did you spend hours doing without getting bored? Don't overthink it. Just be honest, because your answer might tell you something important about yourself. It might even help you understand the dreams you have today.
And in the next part, we're going to talk about something that happens to almost everyone. There comes a moment when life becomes more complicated. Responsibilities increase, priorities change, and many people begin to question their dreams. Why does that happen? Why do some dreams grow stronger while others fade away? And how can we tell the difference between a dream we've outgrown and a dream we've simply neglected? That's what we'll explore next.
One thing I've noticed is that at some point, almost everyone experiences a shift in the way they think about their future. When we're young, dreams often feel simple. We imagine where we want to go, what we want to do, and who we want to become. But as life moves forward, things become more complicated. We gain responsibilities. We experience success and failure. We meet different people. And slowly, our understanding of life begins to change. I remember being in my early 20s and thinking I had everything figured out. I was convinced that success looked a certain way. I thought there was a specific path I needed to follow. And if I followed it correctly, I would eventually arrive at happiness. Looking back now, I realize how much my perspective has changed.
I can definitely relate to that. When I was younger, I believed that achieving my goals would automatically make me happy. I thought happiness was waiting for me somewhere in the future. Maybe after getting a better job, maybe after earning more money, maybe after accomplishing something important. There was always a reason to postpone happiness. I kept telling myself, I'll enjoy life when I finally get there. But the funny thing is, every time I reached a goal, another goal appeared. The finish line kept moving. And eventually, I realized something that many people discover sooner or later. Life isn't something that starts after you achieve your dreams. Life is happening right now.
That's such an important realization because many people spend years chasing a future version of happiness. They become so focused on where they're going that they forget to appreciate where they are. And don't get me wrong, goals are important. Dreams are important. Having something to work toward gives life meaning. But I think the healthiest approach is learning how to enjoy the journey while still pursuing the destination. Otherwise, we can spend decades waiting for a moment that never arrives.
Exactly. And I think that's one reason our dreams often change over time. As we gain experience, we start understanding ourselves better. For example, when I was younger, I thought success meant impressing other people. I wanted recognition. I wanted people to look at my life and think I was doing well. But now, success means something completely different. These days, I value peace much more than approval. I value meaningful relationships more than status. And I value having control over my time more than having impressive achievements. Those priorities didn't change overnight. They changed because of experience.
That's interesting because I think many people go through something similar. When we're young, it's easy to be influenced by what society tells us success should look like. We're surrounded by messages about money, status, and achievement. And sometimes we start chasing goals without asking ourselves a very important question. Do I actually want this? Or am I pursuing it because everyone else seems to want it? I think that's one of the most valuable questions a person can ask. Because there's a big difference between your dream and someone else's dream.
There really is, and sometimes we don't realize the difference until much later. I've met people who spent years pursuing careers they didn't enjoy, not because they lacked talent, not because they were unsuccessful, but because deep down, the goal never truly belonged to them. It was a dream they inherited from someone else, maybe from society, maybe from family expectations, maybe from comparison. And eventually, they reached a point where they had to stop and ask themselves what they genuinely wanted.
I think that's one reason personal growth can feel uncomfortable. As we grow, we sometimes outgrow certain dreams, and letting go of an old dream can be difficult, especially if we've invested a lot of time and energy into it. There's a part of us that wants to hold on, a part of us that worries changing direction means failure. But I don't think that's true. Sometimes changing direction is actually a sign of wisdom. It means we've learned something new about ourselves. It means we're paying attention to who we're becoming.
I completely agree. And honestly, some of the best decisions I've made in life came after changing my mind. At first, I felt guilty about it. I thought I was giving up. I thought I was abandoning a dream. But later, I realized I wasn't giving up. I was growing. I was becoming more honest about what I truly wanted. And that's something worth remembering. Not every dream is meant to last forever. Some dreams serve a purpose for a certain season of our lives. They teach us lessons, they help us grow, and then they naturally evolve into something new.
That's a beautiful way to look at it, because I think many listeners may be going through that right now. Maybe they're questioning a goal they've had for years. Maybe they're wondering whether they should try something different. Maybe they're afraid of making a change. If that's you, remember this. Changing your dream doesn't erase the progress you've made. The experiences you've gained still matter. The lessons you've learned still matter. Nothing is wasted. Every chapter contributes to the person you're becoming.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest lesson from today's conversation so far. Dreams are not fixed, they're living things. They grow with us. They adapt as we learn more about ourselves and the world around us. The person you are today is not the same person you were 10 years ago, so it makes sense that your dreams might be different too. And that's not something to fear, it's something to embrace.
Before we move on, let's leave our listeners with a question. Think about the dreams you had 5 years ago. How many of them are still the same? How many have changed? And more importantly, what have those changes taught you about yourself? Sometimes the answer to that question reveals more than we expect.
And in the next part, we're going to talk about one of the biggest challenges people face when pursuing any dream: fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of starting over. Why does fear have so much power over us? And how can we move forward even when we're afraid? Let's talk about that next.
After everything we've talked about so far, there's one thing we haven't really discussed yet. And honestly, it might be the biggest reason why people never pursue their dreams: fear. Not a lack of talent, not a lack of intelligence, not even a lack of opportunity. Fear. I've noticed that whenever people talk about goals they never achieved, fear is usually somewhere in the story. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's hidden, but it's almost always there. And the strange thing is that fear often appears long before anything actually goes wrong.
That's so true. In fact, I think many people don't fail because they tried and lost. They fail because they never started. They spend years imagining what could go wrong. They imagine making mistakes. They imagine being embarrassed. They imagine being judged. And after thinking about those possibilities for long enough, they convince themselves not to try at all. What's interesting is that most of those fears never become reality. They're simply stories our minds create. But even imaginary fears can feel very real.
Exactly. And I think one of the most common fears is the fear of failure. People want guarantees. They want certainty. They want proof that their effort will be rewarded. But life rarely works that way. Nobody can guarantee success. Nobody can promise that things will go exactly according to plan. And that's uncomfortable, because human beings naturally prefer certainty. We like knowing what's going to happen next. Dreams don't come with that kind of security. They require us to step into the unknown.
And that's what makes them scary. Think about learning English, for example. Many people listening right now probably understand more English than they think. They've studied vocabulary, they've watched videos, they've practiced grammar, But when it's time to actually speak, something happens. Fear shows up. They worry about making mistakes. They worry about sounding strange. They worry about being judged. So instead of speaking, they stay silent. Not because they can't speak, but because they're afraid.
I think that's a perfect example. And honestly, that fear exists in almost every area of life. Someone wants to start a business, but they're afraid it might fail. Someone wants to apply for a new job, but they're afraid of rejection. Someone wants to travel alone, but they're afraid of the unknown. Someone wants to change their life, but they're afraid of leaving their comfort zone. Different situations, same emotion, fear.
And here's something I've learned over the years. Fear doesn't disappear before action. It usually disappears after action. I used to think confident people weren't afraid. But now I realize that's not true at all. Most confident people feel fear just like everyone else. The difference is that they don't wait for fear to disappear. They take action anyway. And every small action makes fear a little weaker. Every experience builds confidence. Every step forward proves that they're capable of more than they thought.
I love that idea because so many people are waiting to feel ready. They're waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity, the perfect level of confidence. But what if that moment never comes? What if confidence isn't something you find? What if confidence is something you build? Maybe confidence isn't the starting point. Maybe it's the result of taking action repeatedly.
I think that's exactly right. When you look at people who seem confident today, you're only seeing the final chapter. You're not seeing the mistakes they made, the awkward moments, the failures, the uncertainty, the countless times they doubted themselves. Every successful person has a story filled with challenges. The difference is that they kept going, not because they were fearless, but because they decided their dream was more important than their fear.
That's a powerful thought. And it reminds me of another fear that many people struggle with, the fear of judgment. Honestly, I think this fear stops more people than failure itself. People worry about what others might think. What if someone laughs? What if someone criticizes them? What if they look foolish? And because of those worries, they hide their goals. They hide their ambitions. Sometimes they even hide their true personality.
Yes, and the funny thing is that most people are too busy thinking about their own lives to spend much time judging ours. We often imagine that everyone is watching us, but in reality, most people are focused on themselves, their own problems, their own goals, their own fears. And even if someone does judge us, does that really matter? At the end of the day, we're the ones who have to live our lives, not them.
That's such an important perspective. Because if we let fear of judgment control us, we end up living according to other people's opinions, and that's a dangerous way to live. The people who achieve meaningful things aren't always the most talented. They're often the people willing to look foolish for a while, willing to make mistakes, willing to be beginners, willing to learn.
Absolutely. And I think there's one more fear we should talk about, the fear of being too late. I've heard people say, I'm too old. I missed my chance. I should have started years ago. But honestly, I don't think it's ever as late as people think. Maybe you won't become an Olympic athlete at 60. That's true. But there are countless things you can still learn, build, improve, and achieve. As long as you're alive, your story isn't finished.
I couldn't agree more. And maybe that's the message we want listeners to remember today. Fear will always exist. It doesn't matter how talented you are. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. Fear is part of being human. The goal isn't to eliminate fear completely. The goal is to stop letting fear make decisions for you. Because when fear becomes the decision maker, dreams stay dreams. But when courage takes over, dreams start becoming reality.
Exactly. And courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. Courage means you're afraid and you move forward anyway. That's what growth looks like. That's what progress looks like. And that's what every meaningful journey requires.
So, before we continue, let's ask our listeners one simple question. What's one thing you've been afraid to do? Maybe it's speaking English. Maybe it's applying for a new opportunity. Maybe it's pursuing a dream you've been thinking about for years. Whatever it is, imagine taking one small step toward it this week. Not a huge step, just one small step. Because sometimes that's all it takes to begin.
And in the next part, we're going to talk about something exciting. What happens when people finally stop listening to fear and start moving toward their dreams? How do goals become reality? What habits help people keep going? And what can we learn from those who never gave up? Let's explore that together.
After talking about fear, I think it's important to talk about something else hope. Because if we're being honest, every dream begins with hope. It's the belief that life can be better than it is today. It's the belief that growth is possible. It's the belief that the future doesn't have to look exactly like the present. And when people lose hope, they often stop taking action. That's why I think hope is more powerful than most people realize.
I agree. And one thing I've noticed is that people often underestimate the power of small actions. They imagine success as one big moment, one huge breakthrough, one life-changing opportunity. But most success stories don't happen that way. Most of them are built from small actions repeated over a long period of time. A person learns a little every day, improves a little every day, practices a little every day. And eventually, those small efforts create remarkable results.
That's something I've learned too. When people look at someone successful, they usually see the result. They don't see the years of preparation behind it. They don't see the mistakes, the setbacks, the frustration, the moments when quitting would have been easier. Success often looks sudden from the outside, but from the inside, it's usually a very long journey.
Exactly. And I think that's why patience is so important. We live in a world where everyone wants immediate results. People want to learn English in a month, build confidence in a week, achieve their goals as quickly as possible. But meaningful progress takes time. Just like a tree doesn't grow overnight, neither do our dreams. Growth happens gradually, sometimes so gradually that we don't notice it at first.
That's a great comparison. And it reminds me of something. Many people quit because they don't see progress fast enough. They start learning a skill, they practice for a few weeks, maybe even a few months. Then they look at where they are and feel disappointed. But what they don't realize is that they're already further ahead than when they started. The changes are simply too small to notice day by day.
I think that's especially true for language learning. People often focus on what they can't do. Instead of recognizing how much they've improved, maybe they still make mistakes. Maybe they still struggle with certain words. But they're understanding more, they're speaking more, they're improving. And that's what matters. Progress doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to continue.
I love that. Progress doesn't have to be perfect. That's something everyone needs to hear. Because perfection stops a lot of people. They wait until they're ready, until they're confident, until everything feels perfect. But life rarely gives us perfect conditions. Most opportunities come while we're still learning, still growing, still figuring things out.
And that's okay. Nobody starts as an expert. Nobody starts with complete confidence. Every skilled person was once a beginner. Every successful person once felt uncertain. Every fluent English speaker once struggled to form simple sentences. That's how growth works. You improve by doing, not by waiting.
I think one of the biggest differences between people who achieve their goals and people who don't is consistency, not talent, not intelligence, consistency. The ability to keep showing up even when motivation disappears. Because motivation comes and goes. Some days we feel inspired, some days we don't. But habits allow us to continue even when motivation is missing.
That's such an important point. People often think successful individuals are motivated all the time, but that's rarely true. They simply learn how to continue even when they don't feel like it. They create routines. They build discipline. And over time, those habits become stronger than temporary emotions. That's why small daily actions can be so powerful. They don't seem significant in the moment, but over months and years, they completely change the direction of a person's life.
And maybe that's the message we want listeners to remember today. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to know exactly how your story will end. You only need to take the next step, then the next one, and then another, because every dream becomes reality the same way, one step at a time.
I couldn't agree more. And sometimes the next step is surprisingly small. Maybe it's reading one page of a book. Maybe it's practicing English for 10 minutes. Maybe it's sending one application. Maybe it's having one difficult conversation. Small actions may seem insignificant, but they're often the beginning of something much bigger.
And when we look back years later, those small moments often become turning points. The day we started, the day we tried, the day we decided not to give up. At the time, they felt ordinary, but they changed everything.
That's why I think dreams are less about the destination and more about the person we become along the way. Because while we're pursuing a goal, we're also developing patience, confidence, discipline, resilience, and those qualities stay with us long after the goal is achieved.
Before we finish today's conversation, let's ask one final question. Imagine yourself 5 years from now. What would make you proud? Not what would impress other people, not what society expects. What would genuinely make you proud of yourself? Take a moment and think about it, because the answer might tell you exactly where to focus your energy.
And remember, you don't need to move fast. You just need to keep moving. A small step today is still better than waiting for the perfect moment. Dreams don't become reality because of luck alone. They become reality because someone chooses to continue. Again and again, even when it's difficult, even when progress feels slow, even when fear is present.
Thank you for spending this time with us today. We hope this conversation has inspired you to think about your dreams, your goals, and the future you want to create. And more importantly, we hope it has reminded you that growth is always possible. No matter where you are today,
Keep learning, keep growing, keep believing in yourself, and most importantly, keep moving forward. We'll see you in the next conversation.
before we finish today's conversation, there's one more thing I've been thinking about. Sometimes people hear discussions about dreams and goals, and they immediately feel pressure. They start thinking about everything they haven't done yet, everything they should be doing, everything they're behind on. But I don't think that's the purpose of a conversation like this.
I agree. In fact, I think the purpose is the opposite. It's not about creating pressure, it's about creating awareness. Because many people move through life on autopilot. They wake up, go to work, come home, repeat the same routine. And before they know it, months or even years have passed. There's nothing wrong with routine, but every once in a while, it's important to stop and ask ourselves where we're going.
That's such a good point. And I think one of the most powerful habits anyone can develop is reflection. Taking a few minutes to think, not about what everyone else is doing, but about your own life, your own goals, your own values. Because when we stop reflecting, it's easy to drift in a direction we never intended to go.
Exactly. And reflection doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it's as simple as asking yourself a few questions. What am I enjoying right now? What am I learning? What do I want more of in my life? What do I want less of? Those questions sound simple, but they can reveal a lot.
One thing I've learned is that happiness often comes from progress, not perfection. Progress. When we feel like we're moving forward, even slowly, life feels more meaningful. We feel energized. We feel hopeful. The problem is that many people only celebrate huge achievements. They ignore all the small victories along the way.
That's true. And those small victories matter. Maybe today you learned 10 new English words. Maybe you finally started reading a book you've been postponing. Maybe you had a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Those things might seem small, but they represent growth, and growth deserves recognition.
I think that's something our listeners should remember. Don't wait until you reach the final destination to feel proud of yourself. Be proud of the effort. Be proud of the courage it takes to keep going. Be proud of every small step, because those small steps eventually create extraordinary results.
And speaking of small steps, let's make this practical. If you're listening right now, here's a challenge. Take a piece of paper or open the Notes app on your phone and write down the answer to one question. What is one thing I want to achieve in the next year? Not 10 things, not 20 things, just one. Keep it simple, keep it clear, and keep it meaningful.
That's great advice because clarity creates direction. When we know what we're working toward, it's easier to make decisions. It's easier to stay focused. And it's easier to recognize opportunities when they appear.
Absolutely. And remember, your goal doesn't have to impress anyone. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to look like someone else's goal. It only needs to matter to you. That's enough.
Before we say goodbye, let's leave everyone with one final thought. 5 years from now, you'll wish you had started today. Not because today is perfect, not because you're fully prepared, but because time moves faster than we realize. The days become weeks, the weeks become months, the months become years, and one day you'll look back and realize how much can change when you consistently take small steps forward.
So keep dreaming, keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep believing that change is possible because it is. One decision, one habit, one day at a time.
Thanks for joining us today.
We'll see you again in the next English conversation. Take care and keep moving forward.
Before we say goodbye today, we'd like to leave you with one final thought. Dreams don't become reality overnight. They grow little by little, one decision, one action, one day at a time. And sometimes, the most important step isn't a huge leap forward. Sometimes it's simply refusing to give up.
Exactly. And if there's one thing we hope you remember from today's conversation, it's this. You don't need to have everything figured out right now. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to know exactly where you'll be 5 years from now. Just keep moving forward. Keep learning. Keep growing. And keep believing that your future can be better than your present.
Now we'd love to hear from you. What is one dream you're currently working toward? Maybe it's improving your English. Maybe it's traveling to a new country. Maybe it's starting a business. Or maybe it's simply becoming a better version of yourself. Whatever it is, share it with us in the comments below.
And if you feel comfortable, try writing your answer in English. Don't worry about making mistakes. This is a place to learn, practice, and grow together. We'll be reading your comments, and we'd love to hear your story.
If you enjoyed today's conversation and found it helpful, please take a moment to support the channel. Give this video a like. It really helps more English learners discover our content.
And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to English Mind Journey and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss our next English conversation practice episode.
We have many more topics coming soon. Real-life English conversations, listening practice, shadowing exercises, and meaningful discussions designed to help you speak English more naturally and confidently.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Keep practicing.
Keep believing in yourself.
And remember, Every great journey begins with a single step.
We'll see you in the next episode. Take care and have a wonderful day.